I mean, you're gonna eat good, right? But the hunt's not gonna be fun.
Hey everybody, Ken Mah, welcome back to the channel. So when I was at the International Sportsman Exposition Show, I actually got to talk on the Western Bass demonstration tank 2 days. So on the first day, you know, I talked about kind of how I approach things and this, but today on day 2, we really dive into people's questions. I hand out a lot of great stuff, and you know, I hope you enjoy the video. There's a lot of little nuggets in there about techniques, approach, mindset, things like that. So check the video out. Let me know what you think. Leave me some comments. I'll get back to everybody, and I appreciate everybody for being here.
And what I talked about yesterday is what I want to talk about first today, okay? Is that you do who you are. Does that make sense? Okay? You got to do who you are. Like Greg. Greg can be seen throwing a spin rod. Does he do other things? Absolutely, he does other things, okay? And he's going to talk about that. Greg will throw a spinning rod at a moment's notice, okay? Me, on the other hand, right? I'm going to throw it on the last day of the tournament with 2 hours left to go, and I don't have any fish. That's when I'm going to pick it up, out of desperation, okay? Both ways work. Both ways absolutely work, okay? He's won like 8, 10 majors. I've been fortunate enough, I've won 10 majors, and we both go about doing it different ways, okay? We're going to take a quick break, because you know why? The star of the show has shown up. He doesn't like it when I start early. He's going to give me a hard time about it. I started early yesterday. There's too many people here. I didn't want him to leave.
But the schedule says 10:30. They're still even trying to get here.
He's giving me a hard time about starting early.
It's 10:30.
10:30 now. That was just a warm-up.
That was a sound check. You ever been to a concert and do a couple of songs first? That's what he did. 10:30 to what?
Too much energy.
My God.
I started early yesterday.
I know.
But you can't catch fish showing up late.
And then people get here and they go, oh, it's
Right?
just started, right?
Rather be early than late. We'll wait for the fish to bite.
Oh, there you go. Wow, it's Saturday. ISE. Sacramento, day 3, 4-day stop. We got 2 a day. Some of you have had a none but before we got here. Because right after him, we've got Greg Terrace coming up here. Right after that, guy in the big yellow truck, Steve Reese is going to be hanging out with us for 2 hours. Because not only will he won't start early, but he will not stop when he's supposed to. So I decided it's just easier to give Steve 2 hours and let him do whatever he wants. You win a classic and a Bass Master Angler of the Year, I'll give you 2 hours.
You know, I got 2 hours. 1 hour yesterday, 1 hour today.
There you go. So it's kind of fun. But we've got Steve here, we've got Nick Important Fishing, and Alec Bond's going to be coming up here. Brian Smith, our old California Bass Master Research Trailhead to the Classics, going to be up here talking about gold fishing sonar. Okay.
So, going back, thank you, Kent. So where I ended is always do you first. On any body of water, I don't care if the visibility is 1 foot or if the visibility is 20 foot. You got to do you first. If you find fish doing you first, right, the rest of the time should go a lot better. I never want to use the word fishing and easy in the same sentence. I never do that. There's room to sit down if you want to come in, all right? So it will never be easier, okay? But what happens though, if you're doing you, okay, this is what you do, right? When the fishing gets tough, it's gonna be a lot easier for you to do you than to do somebody else. Would you agree to that? Yeah, absolutely, right? You gotta do who you are. So for me, everywhere I go, it does not matter, like I said, if the water clarity, it could be as clear as this tank, okay? I'm gonna get on the bank first, okay? That's what I'm gonna do. That's how I grew up. That's where my strengths are at. So I'm gonna get on the bank and I'm gonna throw a reaction bait. And I might do that for a day. I might do that for 2 days. I might do that for 2 hours. I'll get on the bank. A lot of times too is who likes throwing a spinnerbait, right? People love throwing a spinnerbait, right? Okay, so a lot of times I'll take this bait and replace where you would throw a spinnerbait, right? Because if the field is throwing a spinnerbait, a lot of people are throwing a spinnerbait, the blades are turning, it's kind of loud, right? The fish have seen it. You throw a swim jig, an oversized swim jig in its place, and then what happens is when they stop, if they stop biting that spinnerbait, right, they will bite this really quiet, stealthy, oversized swim bait, and it's swam really in the same areas that you would throw a swim bait. This is a 1/2 ounce bait. I can fish this down to 30, 40 feet if I needed to. It's a really versatile bait. The other thing I could do with this bait is I could throw it up in a foot, hold my rod tip up, and I could just swim it right underneath the surface, right? There's a lot of, and see how those fish are drawn to it? There's a lot of drawing power when you throw a bait greater than 7 inches, right? Some of the best swim bait fishermen, they're gonna throw like a 10, 11, 12, maybe even a 13-inch glide bait so those fish show themselves to them. So they can see the caliber of fish that are in that area. They may end up throwing a drop shot on them or catching them on something different, okay? But wherever you go, remember I said this, do you first. I don't care if you're just starting, okay, or if you're a seasoned angler. If you do what you have confidence in, when the fishing gets tough, you're gonna do it a lot longer and with a lot more conviction. Okay, on my swim jig rod, I typically will throw this big swim jig on 20-pound fluorocarbon. Okay, this is a Loomis IMX Pro, 7.5 foot. It's got a lot of backbone. It's got a lot of tip. Okay, the reason is when those big fish eat it, you want a little bit of tip for that fish to suck that bait in, and then you want all backbone. When people talk about backbone on a fishing rod, it's this area where it doesn't flex very much and there's a lot of power in it. Typically, I'll start with a 6.2, which is a regular gear ratio reel, or I'll go to an HG, which is 7.1 reel. This is a standard setup. You can throw a lot of stuff on this, okay? So the second thing that I do, probably the first thing that I do, right, is I love throwing shallow crankbait. You know, yesterday, Randy McAbee talked after me, and I told the group yesterday that Randy's probably one of the best deep water crankbait fishermen that we have in our area. You know, on the other hand, I love throwing a square bill crankbait, something that goes, you know, anywhere from a foot to about 6 foot. Okay, that's what these crankbaits will do. This is a Bill Lewis SB57. It was designed by Mark Daniels, who's a California native, Ozark crawl. Kent talked about the Western Bass Shootout that I won in April of last year. I actually won $126,000 in that one tournament. I weighed 15 fish over the course of 3 days, and about 4 to 6 fish were caught on this exact bait. And I was throwing it around sparse toolies. There's a lot of grass on the Cal Delta. I always tell people when you're throwing a bait like this, you know, like it's really important. You know, who fishes the Delta or a grass fishery? Okay. Do you guys get tired of digging the grass off your bait? I see a lot of nods. Okay. And what happens is, look, on the Delta, on Clear Lake, and anywhere where there's grass in a fishery, I believe, even like Lake Mead, as clear as it is, I believe a large concentration of bass live in the grass, right? So if you shy away from the grass, I would really suggest that you start fishing some of that grass, as frustrating as it can be sometimes. You know, you're throwing this square bill, you're throwing a treble hook bait, right? It's getting around the grass, right? And then every cast, like on the Delta after March, every cast I make, I'm in this position right here. I'm picking grass off of this bait. It's frustrating, but that's where they live, okay? That's where the fish live. They live in the grass. Okay, so we have to find ways to extract those fish or to get those fish to come out and eat our bait. One of the most efficient ways to do that is a square bill crankbait and what I call a vibrating jig. Okay, a lipless crankbait. So on the delta, I would say 90% of the winning bass on the delta live in 8 feet or less. 8 feet or less is where they live. They absolutely dominate that depth. Okay, so if you know that the majority of the winning fish, let's say on the delta, live in 3 to 7, that's only a 4-foot range. If you think about that, right? That's like that kid's probably 3.5 feet. Basically, from where that kid is standing to the top of his head, 90% of the fish live in that depth right there. Okay? They live in that depth, so you have to spend your time in that depth. Right? And remember, if you like to fish deeper and you go to a shallow water fishery, you have to relearn or retrain yourself, right, to fish in that depth. It's like me, right? Once I get like past 25 or 30 feet, right, I got to change my mindset, right? But anything from like 0, especially like 0 to 15, 0 to 15, I'm comfortable there. I can throw a lot of power baits in that arena, okay? So, again, and that's what I'm gonna talk about, power fishing and staying shallow. The issue sometimes, like when you go to Lake Mead, for example, you can power fish there. The issue with Lake Mead is you may not end up catching 5 at the end of the day, right? There's not a lot of fish in that lake, or I think there is a lot of fish in that lake. There's not a lot of fish that are willing to bite in that lake, okay? So there's times, I have a really good friend, Nick Salvucci. He was a former US Open champion, okay? He basically won that tournament on 2 baits, on a walking bait and a buzz bait. And he stayed in 3 foot or shallower all 3 days, right? It takes a lot of dedication and conviction to stay that shallow. On day 2, when I talked to him at 1 o'clock, he had 2 fish. 3 o'clock weigh-in, he had 2 fish. Weighed the second heaviest bag on day 2. After I saw him at 1 o'clock with 2 hours left to go and a 45-minute run. Okay, so you do that math. Okay, he had 1 hour and 15 minutes to catch 3 more. Okay, but because he dedicated himself to doing that, he was catching the right ones. Okay, so when I stay shallow, especially with the square bill, I have caught fish. I've caught fish on this bait at Oroville, at Shasta, at places, especially when the water gets dark. Those big fish will move shallow and they will live shallow. Right? They can dominate that area. They love being up there. And those are the fish that I want to target. Those are typically a fish that chases, in my opinion, a fish that chases, they're used to chasing big bait, big prey, and they want to chase something, right? It's just like hunting, right? A lot of people hunt in here. If it was easy, would you enjoy it as much? You just walk out of your house and you shoot something and you drag it in your front door. Would that be easy to you? No, it wouldn't be, okay? I mean, you're gonna eat good, right? But the hunt's not gonna be fun, okay? Just like those bass want to chase something big down. They're used to chasing something big down, okay? So on the square bill rod, 7.5 foot, this is a Loomis NRX rod. I actually like it. It's not made for square billing. I throw it on a 6:2-to-1 gear ratio reel, 16-pound FC fluorocarbon crank FC, okay? I'll have all this stuff down there. You can take a look at it and handle it. You see how much bend and flex there is in this rod? Anytime I'm throwing treble hooks or things, I want a little bit of bend, a little bit of flex in this rod, right? Because when a fish eats that bait, I want that fish to be able to get that bait. You can't throw these kind of baits on really stiff or non-forgiving types of rods, okay? So I've thrown this on as light as 12 if I want to get it deeper. So as a general rule of thumb, like this bait right here on 16, this is on 14. This bait, like if I try and I get it down, it'll crank on the bottom of this tank, and it'll hit stuff, right? It'll deflect, okay? So this bait will actually work really easily down to about 4 or 5 feet. You just keep your rod tip down, right? Impart some action. If you're not feeling anything, let it flutter, let it float, speed it up, start it. I talked about that yesterday, right? You can't, especially if you're teaching young people how to fish, or even yourself, okay? When you fish for an hour and you haven't gotten a bite, what happens to you? Anybody want to tell me what happens to them? You get frustrated, okay? What happens physically with that frustration? You start speeding up. That's what happens. You'll remember this when I tell you this. You'll throw the bait out there, you're not getting bit, and then you start doing this, right? Then your retrieve starts getting faster. Your trolling motor goes faster. You're moving around the bank. Everything happens faster, and what you don't realize is you're cranking your bait right over the top of them, okay? I had a conversation yesterday after I got off the tank, okay? I don't think I can afford it without Frank's money, but if I took all of you to Ruth Chris and I was gonna buy you a ribeye every night for the next 7 nights, right? Are you guys gonna come? Okay. By the 3rd or 4th night, are you gonna want something different? Right? But if I tell you you can only eat a ribeye, you might not show up on the 4th day, right? You're like, I've eaten it 4 days in a row, right? I don't want to eat it for the 5th day in a row, right? I feel like eating a dirty McDonald's cheeseburger, right? I don't want your $60 steak. I want a $3 burger, okay? Fish are no different than we are, okay? What you threw yesterday, they might not eat tomorrow, right? And if I asked you, well, can you tell me why you don't want a steak today, right? You can't really tell me why, right? You're just not feeling it. Does that make sense, right? So you're just like, well, you know, Ken, I've ate one for 2 days in a row. I know it's good, but I don't feel like one today. Okay. So you don't show up, you don't eat, right? But here I am throwing you a ribeye every day, right? I'm like, well, he ate a ribeye on Monday. He's going to eat one on Thursday, right? It doesn't work that way. So every day, you know, that's why they make so many lures, so many baits. They do so many different things. But the number one thing that you can do, all right? So if I know that you don't want to eat a ribeye today, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a baked potato. I'm going to buy him a drink. And I'm going to buy him some appetizers, right? So I'm going to make that ribeye look better. And how we do that in fishing is you either impart action on your bait, okay? It's the same bait, okay? But again, what you do is you're going to force that bait to be deflected off something, or you're going to cause that erraticness, that speed up, that slow down, right? You're going to do all of that to this bait, because there are days where, okay, well, yesterday I wanted it medium rare, today I want it medium. I still want the ribeye, I just want it a little bit different, right? And it's our job as anglers to figure that out. Every day is different. What they ate yesterday, they're not going to eat today, okay? So remember that. But at the same time, right, you can't tie on every lure and, you know, every single color that's in your box. That make sense? Okay. It's hard for me to hear questions. Are there any questions? I'm going to give you free stuff. All right. So this next thing is something that I guess if you talk to people that I'm known for, this is me. I get really passionate about talking about this rod and this technique, okay? So what I'm going to start off is if you see my rod, I throw yellow braid on my flipping, pitch, and punching rod. I throw a bright colored braid, okay? Anybody know why I throw a bright colored braid? Absolutely. So I can see it. Okay? If you notice on my hand, there's a line on my palm that's black. You see that? So it's yellow on top, it's black on the bottom. I take a Marks-A-Lot, jumbo Marks-A-Lot in black, and I color exactly 6 feet of this line on every single one of my rods, all right? So this is 6 feet. I'm about 5'10", right? So I color 6 feet of my line, okay? What that does, I originally did it for camouflage, right? I don't think I want to throw bright yellow line into a fish, right, that can smell better, see better, and swim way better than me, all right? So originally I did it for camouflage, okay? What I've learned over the years, what it does is not only does it give camouflage, right, it tells me exactly what depth my bait is in and where I'm getting bit in, okay? So when I flip this bait out, this is a 1 ounce, okay? It hits the bottom, my line is falling over. I can see, I don't know if you guys see it, but I can see my yellow line clear as day, okay? If you buy green line, black line, brown line, and you color it black, right? The part that's in the water is what color? It's black. That's what the fish see, okay? Everything above that, I want to see, okay? The reason is just like I talked about yesterday, okay? Oh, this gentleman right here, right? Out of all of you, I love you all, right? If I want to catch one of you, I want to catch him, okay? He's in his house. I said this yesterday. He's in his house, okay? And this is what I say. A bass is like a lion, okay? I said this yesterday, okay? At his house, okay? Unless he lives with his dad. I'm not going to ask him, okay? But at his house, where you stay, wherever that is, there's a chair in that house that he occupies. Agree or disagree? You got a little brother? Older brother? Okay. So when he shows up to that chair, right? He don't have to say a word. He shows up, right? It's like you, okay? If your son, you have a kid? If your son is sitting in your chair and you show up in the living room, you don't got to say nothing, right? He went like this. Psst. He's out, psst. Right? DC, same thing, right? Dad shows up, mom shows up, he gets out of the chair. You know why? He understands the repercussions. He understands that he might get ate, right? A 6-pound bass will kill a 3-pound bass. Can kill a 3-pound bass, okay? So we don't wait around, right? Look, I'm in my house. My dad walks into my house and he wants my chair. I'm getting up. Simple as that. That's just respect, okay? I'm bigger than him too, okay? But my point is when a bass wants to occupy that space, there is nothing, and on some of these lakes like Clear Lake, the bass has no predators. A 7-8 pound bass doesn't, I mean, maybe a sea otter, okay? But for the most part, it's not like the Delta where there's a 300-pound sea lion, right? That can eat a 10, 12-pound bass, okay? So if I know that that bass that I'm targeting is gonna occupy that spot on the spot, right? When I come up to that spot, okay, when I'm flipping, I'm looking for little irregularities, okay? There's no difference than what we do as humans, okay? If I took you all out to a parking lot and it was 100 degrees out there in July and I took you to a parking lot, I put up a pop-up tent, I was grilling hot dogs and I had ice cold water there, right? Where would you come stand? You're not standing in the middle where it's 100. You're coming to my tent. That's where you're gonna come because I'm gonna give you water and there's food there when you wanna eat. Even if you're not hungry, that's what you're gonna do. So our job, when we come, right, when you look at a piece of cover, when you look at how the current's moving, when you look at that entire scenario, your job is to say, all right, I see where this fish should be sitting. Does that make sense? Okay? You can vision it. You can see it, right? You can see a mat that comes to a point, right? Little bit of currents coming around it. The perfect mixture of two grasses are hitting that, right? So it's your job, right, to take this ounce, ounce and a half, ounce and 3/4. It's your job to DoorDash this bait into that place, okay? So I'm gonna look at it and I'm gonna make this pitch, right? And I'm gonna let it fall right down to the bottom, okay? When that bait hits the water, okay, everything about your body language has to be right here, okay? You cannot do this doing this. You can throw Cinco this way, right? I see Greg all the time. Greg's like, oh, I got bit. No, he doesn't do that, all right? You know, so you can, if you're throwing other baits, you can lapse focus is what I call it. You can go through the motions. This is going through the motions right here, right? And a lot of you, a lot of us, this is how you fish, right? You're on your phone looking at Instagram, right? You're watching the ski boats go by. You're not focused right here, right now. And this is why it's so important. 90% of the fish that bite this bait will bite it on the initial fall, the initial drop of this bait, okay? So every time you make a presentation, boom, falling, I'm following, right there it hit the bottom. I know it hit the bottom. My line's laid over. I can see my line, right? Everything is right here, okay? The first thing you do, I don't care if it's an ounce bait or if it's a 1/4 ounce bait. The first thing you do is you check the weight of your bait, okay? So I have an ounce weight on here. I'm gonna put both my hands on the rod. I'm gonna lift real slow, and I'm gonna check the weight of my bait, okay? Really, really important, because what happens is a fish will bite your bait. You won't even know it. You're sitting here popping it. That fish is holding it, okay? Something I learned when I was like 20 years old from Bobby Barrack, okay? Fish do not have hands. Maybe you just learned that today, okay? Fish do not have hands, okay? So if your bait has tension on it, if it's moving, if it feels funny, right? If it didn't sink to the bottom, right? They're not holding it in their hand, okay? The fish are holding it in their mouth, right? Or you're dragging across one of them, okay? And this is what I would say to you. And I've told people this for years. If you get on YouTube and you Google big mouth forever, okay? Some of you guys will do it right now, right? If you Google big mouth forever, it will change the way you fish right after you view that video, okay? It was filmed like 40 years ago. I remember getting it on VHS. You watch that video, okay? There's a video of a really good angler. He's fishing in that video, okay? He's throwing treble hook lures, spinner baits, all kinds of stuff. And there's an underwater photographer. The water is gin clear. And there are so many incidents where 7, 8, there was one that was like a 9-pound bass, swam out of the grass, ate his crankbait, okay? Swam 3 feet away from him, spit the crankbait out, and he kept reeling. They interviewed him about that strike. You know what he said? He never even felt it. He never even felt the fish bite a bait. We're talking about an 8-pound bass eating a bait that he is cranking with treble hooks. He says, I never felt that fish bite my bait. Okay? So, I tell people all the time, I've had co-anglers get in my boat where let's say 80% of the day I'm gonna have this rod in my hand, okay? If I catch 20 fish on this rod in a day, it's a tremendous day. But you know how many times I set the hook that day? Probably 50 or 60 times. I set the hook that many times on just something different, okay? Whether it was pressure, whether I thought my line jumped, whatever that was, I've set the hook, right? I mean, personally, I think setting the hook's one of the funnest parts about fishing. I actually have more fun setting the hook than I have catching fish, okay? Especially on this technique, okay? So again, flip it out there, sinks to the bottom. First thing you're gonna do, feet, knees, hips, shoulders, and your eyes are square on the target, right where your line is entering the water, okay? Because again, if you're here trying to set the hook, all right, what we're trying to do is pull baby elephants out of their house, okay? Like I said, if I come to your house and I tie a rope around your ankle and me and Jeremy try to pull you out of their house, someone's getting hurt, okay? It's not gonna be fun trying to pull him out of his house, okay? And that's what we're trying to do with this technique, right? I am door dashing my bait into somebody's house and I wanna pull him out of a window, not even the front door. I wanna pull him out of a window, okay? So you have to do everything right. Everything you do has to be right. And you have to stay focused on what you're doing. Do you know how hard it is to make 2,000 of these flips in a day and stay right here like where I'm at? Right here, right? The whole time I am right there, right? To do that 2,000 times in a day and to be that focused, I always tell people, if you fish this technique and you do it for more than 60% of the day, and at the end of the day, you're not mentally fatigued, you're not doing it right. You're going through the motions. If you're not mentally fatigued, right, it takes a lot to do this. The reward is extremely high, okay? So, I've made my pitches. We've talked about where the fish live. My baits hit the bottom. What do? This is my normal get down on any body of water. I flip it down there, I let it sink to the bottom, okay? I'm gonna lift this line up and I'm gonna check the weight of my bait, just like I told you. It's a really light lift, right? I'm gonna check the weight of my bait. Doesn't feel like anything's there, there's no pressure, there's nothing going on. What I'm gonna do is 2 quick pops. I'm gonna go just like this, and I'm gonna follow my bait and my line back to the bottom, okay? So I'm gonna pop, see how it falls? It's gonna fall back to the bottom, right? And then after about 2 or 3 times, I'm gonna reel it up, right? And I'm gonna go find another spot, right? And it's about making those initial presentations, about that initial drop, okay? That's really important. All right, so again, I did talk about the equipment. I actually went to a Owner HD hook. They just came out with it like last year. Not sponsored by them. I think it's a great hook. I buy it from November to March. I'm pretty much black and blue. This is a G-Money punch skirt, right? It's black and blue. That's pretty much what I throw from November through about March. And then from April through November, I start introducing some reds, some spring crawl types of colors. Peanut butter and jelly is a fantastic color. You know, those crawdads starting in April, they start getting a lot more red then they get that really dark color, okay? So this is a Loomis GLX. It's a 711 flip and stick. I always recommend that you throw 7-10 to 8 foot heavy action flip and stick. Some people like to have a little bit of bend in their flip and stick. I don't, okay? My belief is it's just like swim bait fishing, okay? When you hook a big fish on a swim bait, anybody ever done that? Hook a big fish like on a 8-inch glide or a 10-inch glide, okay? All right, my rule when you hook a big fish on a swim bait is you got 2 jumps. 2 jumps. You guys that throw swim baits understand what that means, okay? That fish surfaces once, okay? Your chance of landing that fish, 70%. That fish surfaces twice, 50%. The third time, it's gone. Done. You're not landing it, okay? So on this technique, I don't fight them. I winch them. 80-pound braid, right? Lose torque, okay? So they do make higher gears than this Cronart, okay? I don't throw them because what happens when you're in all that heavy vegetation and you're trying to crank and pull that fish out, your reel doesn't have the startup inertia or the torque to pull that reel out. It's like riding a bike, right? When you're going uphill, you drop your gears, right? So you can pedal. You're not pedaling on a high gear when you're going uphill. Okay? So really important for me, line retrieve is important. This reel will retrieve about 37 to 38 inches per crank. It's also a 150 size reel, where this reel is a 200 size reel. And all that means is that the spool in the reel on this is bigger than the spool in the reel on this, okay? And because I hold, when you're flipping, pitching, and punching, a lot of times your hands are like this. It's an uncomfortable position to be here as opposed to be here, right? So reducing the weight of your rod and your reel will help with the fatigue and will help with your focus, okay? So the other thing I tell people is buy the best equipment you can afford, right? Do I want you to go and buy a Loomis GLX rod for $600? Yeah, go buy one if you can afford it. If not, buy the best $200 rod, $300 rod, or $100 rod that you feel that is best for what you're doing, okay? Say what? Okay, great question. I don't want to go over here. All right, so his question was, is how deep do I punch, okay? The majority of the time, right, I want to punch in that 4 to 7. On the Delta, 4 to 7 is where I want to be. There's days where they're out deeper, okay? And my formula, what I do is, when I'm fishing matted vegetation, okay, meaning vegetation that's floating on top of the water, there may or may not be grass underneath it or not, okay? Usually, when I see a mat that's floating, if there's more than 10 feet of water under it, I don't like those mats, okay? The reason I don't like those mats is because it opens up those big fish to predation, okay? So if I have a mat hanging over 10 feet of water and that fish is sitting on the end of the water in 10 feet, what can happen to that fish? It can get ate by a whole bunch of stuff on the Delta. A 3-pound bass will get ate by a 20-pound striper, right? Sea lions will eat those fish. But when that fish gets comfortable, you know, in that 7, 6, 5, 4 foot range, that fish will live there, okay? The other thing that I look for, fantastic question. The other thing that I look for also when I'm flipping, on the Delta, okay, the tide, there's 4 tide cycles, 2 highs and 2 lows in a 24-hour period, okay? That tide cycle can fluctuate up to 6 feet, meaning a high tide could be 480, the low tide could be a minus 150, so you have a 6-foot tide swing, okay? It's very important to me when I find floating mats that are floating on top of the water, okay? I do not like to fish those mats that at high tide there's only 3 feet of water or less under them. Because of what I just said, makes sense, right? Okay? Because if the water drops 4 feet and there's 3 feet under that mat, what does that fish have to do? The fish has to relocate, okay? And I know there's a lot of seasoned, I didn't say old, there's a lot of seasoned people sitting here listening to me talk. And at your house, in your truck, wherever you're at, you know exactly how to get comfortable, right? You know what clothes you're wearing, you know what slippers you're putting on, you know what sweatshirt you're wearing, right? You know what chair you're sitting in, right? That comes from experience, right? A 7-pound bass is the king of the jungle. It is one of the hardest fish to land. 6.5 to about 7.5 pounds. That fish has the most stamina, the most strength, and has the most experience, right? For those of us that have lucky to have caught 9, 10-pound bass, do they fight really good? They don't fight that good. They fight hard for a second, and they're like, okay, you got me, right? I'm tired, bring me in, right? Take your selfie, let me go, okay? Let me go so I can make somebody else happy again, right? But that 7-pound bass, right, is in its prime. And when you hook one of those fish everything that you do has to be right, okay? Everything you do has to be right. This might be the last thing I get to here, okay? So, something that I grew up fishing, one of the most versatile baits that you can fish in a foot of water, or you can fish in 20 foot of water, okay? It's a lipless crankbait. This is a Bill Lewis rattle trap. They make a bunch of different ones. I throw them all, okay? But for water, like the Delta, anytime I'm fishing 7 feet or less, okay, I want to throw this bait first. The reason I want to throw this bait first is because of the way that it falls. It flutters, it kind of drops like a spoon, and it's very erratic. A lot of the premium baits, okay, like a Lucky Craft, for instance, or Jackal, a lot of the premium baits, you know, because of the tungsten weight in them and the way that they're made, they fall directly down to the bottom. They just fall really fast. And on a grass fishery like the Delta, when there's that much grass, when that bait falls, what happens? It falls into the grass and it's gone. It lost it. That fish is not going to spend that kind of time. It wants something that's going to flutter. It wants something that looks like it's dying, something that's easy to eat. Now, when I get deeper, when I get in that 8 to say 15 foot range, I'll go to 3/4. I'll go to a 3/4, right? But a lot of times, what I love about this bait is there are times, right, where you'll throw this bait out, you can give it to a kid like my dad did, you can throw it out there and you can reel it back. You can just reel it back under the surface, just like this, okay? And if the fish are in a great mood, they're gonna bite it, they're gonna chase it, okay? A lot of times, what I tell people is throw this bait, let it sink down. If the grass is nice and crunchy, it'll come right out of the grass. And you just wanna do little pops, little speed ups, you wanna flutter this bait, okay? It is such a versatile bait. Like I said, you can fish it in a foot of water, okay? Or you can fish it in 15 or 20, right? There's a lot of versatility in this bait. For the rod and reel on this bait, this is actually almost an 8 foot cranking rod. You see how much bend there is in this rod? A lot of tip. It's a Shimano Zodius rod. I like the long handle. I like the long handle on this. The reason I like the long handle, and I throw this on an XG reel, 8-4-1, picks up like 44 inches per crank. The reason is, I'm gonna show you, okay? So you make a really long cast on this bait, okay? And let's say you're yo-yoing this bait, right? You're doing lifts. So what happens is, try not to watch the bait, watch my rod, okay? So you're here fishing, you lift this bait up. The bait comes up and it falls. Right as it's falling, it gets bit, right? You feel that fish slackline your lure, right? Now what happens? How much line do I have out? Think of it, I got a lot of line out. This rod's 8 foot. I can almost point the bottom of my rod. I got 16 feet of line out, okay? So if this reel is capable of picking up 4 feet per crank, that's 4 cranks. Did I do the math right? Yeah. All right. That's 4 cranks, 16 feet. If you have a slower reel that only picks up 3 feet, you got to crank it 5 times to get that. Okay? So what happens, that fish has ate your bait. Okay? You felt it eat it. Now what you have to do is you have to reel up all this slack and then you have to set the hook. Okay? If you don't do it today, here, when you go home, YouTube Big Mouth Forever, it will change the way you fish right after you watch that video. I am telling you, you will watch that video. There might be 2. It might be Big Mouth Forever 2. When you watch those big fish eat that bait and swim away from the person fishing and spit that bait out, and the person tells you, I never even knew that fish bit, it's going to change how often you set the hook, right? And how focused you become. Okay? All right. So, Greg Gutierrez is on next. Don't leave. He's a wealth of knowledge.